The ring was still on her finger when I found out. My name is Daniel. I'm 31 years old, and I design load-bearing structures for a living. I calculate exactly how much weight a beam can carry before it snaps. I've always believed that if you understand the math, you can prevent the collapse. I applied that same logic to my relationship with Mara for 3 years. I measured everything. I was careful. I thought I had built something that could hold. I was wrong about the math. It was a Tuesday evening when I found out, 3 days after I proposed at Riverfront Park, on the pedestrian bridge above the falls, with a ring I'd spent 4 months choosing. She had cried. Real tears, the kind that come from somewhere deep. She covered her mouth with both hands, and when she finally said yes, her voice broke in a way I had never heard before. I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. I held her for a long time on that bridge, the water roaring beneath us, and I felt like a man who had finally gotten everything right. 3 days later, I was sitting in our apartment, her apartment, technically, the one I basically lived in, waiting for her to come home from what she called a late team meeting. I wasn't suspicious. Not yet. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, looking at honeymoon destinations in Portugal, when her phone lit up on the counter. She had forgotten it. Left it behind in her rush that morning. I wasn't going to look at it. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of person who goes through someone's phone. I had never done it before in 3 years. But the screen lit up again, and this time I could see the name from across the room. Cole. And the preview of the message read, "Tonight was." The screen went dark before I could read the rest. I sat very still for a moment. The apartment felt suddenly different, the same furniture, the same light from the kitchen window, the same smell of the candle she always burned near the sink. But something had shifted in the air, like the pressure before a storm. I told myself it was nothing. A work colleague. A project update. Cole was a name she had mentioned before, something about a campaign they were running together. I told myself a lot of things in that moment. But I didn't go back to the honeymoon destinations. Mara and I had met at a friend's birthday dinner 3 years earlier. She was sitting across the table, laughing at something someone said, and she had this way of laughing where she tilted her head slightly to the left and closed her eyes for just a second, like the laugh surprised her too. I noticed that immediately. I noticed a lot of things about her immediately. We started dating 6 weeks after that dinner. She was warm, social, easy to be around. She worked in marketing for a mid-sized tech company downtown, long hours sometimes, but she was ambitious and I respected that. I was deep in a major project at my firm, designing a pedestrian overpass for the city, and we were both busy in that way young professionals are busy, where the busyness feels productive and shared, like you're both building towards something. For most of those 3 years, things were good. Genuinely good. We had rhythms. Sunday mornings with coffee and the farmer's market. Tuesday dinners she cooked because she got home earlier those days. Weekends hiking in the summer, movies in the winter. Her friends liked me. My mother liked her, which meant more than I let on at the time. But looking back now, I can trace the first hairline fracture to about 8 months before that Tuesday night. It was subtle. The kind of thing you notice and then immediately find a reason to dismiss. She started staying later at work. Not every night, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. The company was launching a new product, she explained. A big push. Her whole team was putting in extra hours. I believed her. I had no reason not to. I was working late myself most of that fall. What I didn't pay attention to was the way she came home on those nights. She was always animated. That's the word. Not tired the way people are tired after a long day, but lit up in a specific way, like she'd had 3 cups of coffee at 9 in the evening. I noticed it. I filed it away as enthusiasm for the project. She was like that sometimes, she ran on adrenaline when something excited her professionally. I didn't ask myself what, specifically, was exciting her. There was one evening, this must have been September, maybe early October, when I stopped by her office to surprise her with dinner. We'd been ships in the night that week, and I thought it would be a nice gesture. When I texted from the lobby, she replied quickly, "Still in a meeting, might be another hour, don't wait." I went home. Made dinner for one. Didn't think much of it. But I remember now, when I had pulled into the parking structure, I had passed a silver Audi on the way out. I didn't know Cole's car then. I do now. Looking back, that was probably the first time I was standing at the edge of the truth without knowing it. I was holding takeout bags and thinking about what wine we had at home, and Cole was driving past me in the opposite direction. The gap between what I knew and what was happening was measured in feet. She called me that night around 9, cheerful, apologetic about the meeting running long. Said she was finally heading home. I told her I'd saved her some food. She said I was the best. I remember smiling at my phone in the dark kitchen. I was a very good person to deceive. The phone on the counter kept pulling at me that Tuesday evening, even after the screen went dark. I made myself a coffee I didn't drink. I stood at the window and watched the street below for her car. It was November now, and the light died early in Spokane. By 5 o'clock the sky was that dense blue-gray that felt like a ceiling pressing down. I kept thinking about the way she'd cried on the bridge. The way her hands had shaken slightly when I opened the box. You can't perform that, I told myself. That was real. But Cole was a name that had started appearing more frequently over the past few months. Casually. Naturally. The way you'd mention any colleague. Cole thinks we should reframe the campaign. Cole sent this article, it's actually really good. Cole's been carrying most of the client side, he's insane. I had formed a mental image of Cole as someone older. Heavier. Married, probably. I don't know why I decided that, I think I needed him to be unthreatening, so I made him that way in my imagination. When she came home that night, she walked in smiling, unwinding her scarf, and said she was exhausted. She kissed me on the cheek. Her lips were cold from outside. I watched her set her bag down on the chair by the door, the same chair she always used, and I waited for her to realize her phone wasn't in it. It took her about 40 seconds. The change was small. A slight pause in her movement, a recalibration, something behind her eyes when she turned and saw the phone on the counter. She crossed the kitchen and picked it up in one smooth motion, screen down. "Forgot this," she said. "Not to me specifically. Just into the air." "Cole texted you," I said. Evenly. No accusation in my voice, just a statement. She looked at me then, and there was a half-second where something passed across her face that I couldn't fully read. Then she smiled. "Yeah, we've got a presentation Friday, he's been stressing about it." She didn't look at the phone. She set it face down on the counter again and opened the refrigerator. I noticed that she didn't look at the phone. A person who has nothing to hide checks their messages. A person who needs to control the situation waits. I didn't say anything. But something had settled in my chest that I couldn't shake, a low, persistent unease, like a structural calculation that keeps coming out wrong no matter how many times you recheck it. Over the next week, I started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. Not aggressively, I wasn't following her or demanding explanations. I just began to notice. The volume on her phone, which had always been on, was now perpetually silenced. She'd taken to leaving the room to take certain calls, which she explained away as needing quiet for work. She had started going to the gym on Wednesday evenings, which was new, she had never been a gym person. I mentioned the gym thing once, lightly, said I was glad she was doing something for herself. She said, "Cole actually got me into it. His girlfriend goes to that one." Girlfriend. She had offered that detail unprompted. I stored it without letting my expression change. The detail should have reassured me. Instead it did the opposite. People who are guilty sometimes over-explain. They volunteer the alibi before you ask for it. I am not proud of what I did next. I've made peace with it, but I want to be honest about it. I checked her location. We had each other's locations shared on our phones. We'd set it up over a year earlier, practically, for logistics. I had never actually looked at hers before. It had never occurred to me to. But on a Thursday evening when she said she was at the gym, I opened the app. She was not at the gym. The pin was sitting on a street in the South Hill neighborhood, near a cluster of newer apartment buildings. I knew the area, I'd done some work near there. I sat with the screen in my hands for a long time. I drove there. I know how that sounds. I drove there, parked on the street, and sat in my car in the dark. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, or what I would do if I found anything. I felt a specific kind of shame about being there, a man parked outside an apartment building at 8 in the evening, checking his phone, waiting for something he both wanted and didn't want to see. She came out 40 minutes later. She was not alone. The man with her was tall, dark jacket, laughing at something. He walked her to her car, and they stood close together for a moment, not quite touching, but close in a way that carried its own language. Then she got in her car and he stood watching until she pulled away. I followed her home at a distance. She walked in and told me the gym had been good. Said her shoulders were sore. I handed her a glass of water and said I was glad she'd gone. I went to bed before her and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her move around the apartment. I felt very cold and very awake. The ring she was wearing, the ring I had chosen over 4 months, the ring she had cried over, was on her hand in the next room. Over the next 2 days I went through what I could access without touching her phone. Our shared calendar, which she used to block off work events. There were recurring Wednesday and Thursday evening blocks labeled gym/team check-in. They stretched back 8 months. 8 months. The engagement was 3 days old. She had said yes to me while this had been running in parallel for 8 months. That was the moment the full weight of it landed. Not when I saw them outside the apartment. Not when I checked her location. It was the calendar, the tidy, recurring calendar blocks, the administrative infrastructure of a deception. She had scheduled it. Managed it. Maintained it alongside everything else we had. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and I didn't move for a long time. I thought about the bridge. The tears. The way her voice had broken. I still don't have a clean answer for what those tears were. I chose a Saturday morning. She was in the kitchen when I came in, standing at the counter with coffee, wearing the oversized sweatshirt she always wore on weekends, hair pulled back. She looked comfortable and completely at ease, and that ease, the sheer normalcy of it, was the thing that finally steadied me. I had been bracing myself for this conversation for days, but seeing her standing there so ordinarily, in the apartment where she had lied to me routinely for 8 months, something in me went quiet and clear. I sat down at the table. I put my phone between us, screen up, with the location history open. I need you to tell me about Cole, I said. She looked at the phone. She didn't look at me. The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but it had weight to it, the kind of silence that rewrites everything that came before it. I watched her set her coffee mug down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely steady. Daniel. I drove to South Hill on Thursday, I said. I saw you come out of his building. She sat down. She sat down across from me, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before, not guilt exactly, but something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like relief. How long? I asked. She looked at the table. 8 months. The number hit differently spoken aloud, even though I already knew it. 8 months. We had celebrated her birthday during those 8 months. I had met her parents for the second time. I had chosen a ring. Were you going to tell me? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I didn't know what I wanted. You knew what you wanted when you said yes. She flinched. Small, controlled, but I saw it. What followed was not a dramatic scene. I want to be honest about that. There was no screaming, no thrown objects, no theatrical collapse. We talked for almost 2 hours, steadily, painfully, in the way that two people talk when the relationship is already over and what remains is just the accounting of it. She told me that what she had with Cole had started as something she hadn't planned. That she had convinced herself it wasn't serious. That she thought it would burn itself out before it became a problem. Before it became a problem, I repeated. She hurt herself. She didn't try to recover it. She told me she loved me. She said it more than once, and I believed her, in the way you can believe something and understand simultaneously that it means almost nothing in the context of what's happened. Love without honesty is just a feeling someone has about themselves. I took the ring box from my jacket pocket, I had brought it deliberately, and I set it on the table between us. I think you should take that off, I said. She looked at the box for a long time. Then she reached up and removed the ring slowly, and placed it on top of the box with a small sound that I will not forget. I stood up, took the box, and left the apartment. I stayed with my friend Marcus for 2 weeks. He didn't ask a lot of questions, which was exactly right. I went back once to collect my things while she was at work. I had a key, and I used it for the last time. I moved efficiently, taking only what was mine, leaving everything else exactly as it was. There was a strange dignity in that, in not disrupting her space, in not leaving damage. I locked the door from the inside and left the key on the counter. She texted me 3 days later. Then again a week after that. Then a longer message, carefully written, that said she had ended things with Cole, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she understood if I needed time but hoped I would be willing to talk. I read it twice. I didn't respond. She called twice over the following month. I let both calls go to voicemail. Not out of anger, the anger had mostly burned itself out by then, replaced by something quieter and more final. I just had nothing to say that wouldn't cost me more than it was worth. Marcus asked me once, about a month in, whether I regretted proposing. I thought about it honestly. I said no, not because the outcome wasn't painful, but because the version of me that proposed didn't have the information I have now. He made the best decision he could with what he knew. I don't hold it against him. What I do hold on to, carefully, not bitterly, is what I learned about my own patterns. I was good at accepting explanations. I was good at finding reasons to not look too closely at things that made me uncomfortable. I don't think I was naive exactly, I think I had a deliberate investment in things being fine, and that investment shaped what I was willing to see. That's worth knowing about yourself. About 6 months later, Cole's girlfriend, the one Mara had mentioned unprompted that evening, the alibi detail, called Mara's workplace looking for him. Apparently he had told her he was leaving town for a conference. He was, in fact, not at a conference. I heard this secondhand through a mutual friend, without seeking it out. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel much of anything. By then I had started working on a new project, a renovation on the east side of the city, and I had recently had dinner twice with a woman I'd met through a colleague. Her name was Adrienne. She was a landscape architect. She laughed loudly and without self-consciousness, which I found immediately appealing. Mara called one final time in late spring. I answered, because I was ready to. She said she missed me. She said she'd made the worst mistake of her life. She said she'd been in therapy and had started to understand why she'd done what she did. I told her I was glad she was working through it. I meant that. She asked if there was any possibility of starting over. I told her there wasn't. She asked why. I thought about how to answer that honestly and briefly. I said, because I believe you when you say you love me. I just also know that wasn't enough to stop it the first time. There was a long pause. Then she said okay. She said she was sorry. I told her I knew she was. We said goodbye, and I hung up, and I sat on my apartment balcony in the late afternoon light and watched the neighborhood below and felt, for the first time in a long time, entirely at peace. What this story ultimately reveals is not simply about infidelity, it's about the architecture of self-deception, and how thoroughly two people can construct parallel realities that never quite touch. Mara's betrayal was not a single impulsive act. It was sustained, organized, and maintained over 8 months, alongside genuine affection, shared plans, and real emotion. That's the part that resists easy explanation. She was not performing love while feeling nothing. She was holding two incompatible things simultaneously and finding a way to make that livable. What that requires is a particular kind of internal compartmentalization, the ability to seal off one part of your life so completely that it stops generating guilt in proportion to its size. The recurring calendar blocks are the most revealing detail in the entire story. Not the affair itself, the scheduling of it. That's not impulse. That's maintenance. Daniel's blind spot was structural, not emotional. He was a man trained to identify load-bearing weaknesses, and yet he applied that analytical rigor to everything except his own relationship. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he had an emotional investment in not finding anything wrong. The small anomalies he noticed, the animated energy on late nights, the unprompted mention of Cole's girlfriend, the phone left face down, were each individually dismissible. Together, they formed a pattern he had the capacity to read and chose not to. That choice wasn't weakness. It was a form of protection. The problem is that protection of that kind only delays the collapse, it doesn't prevent it. The proposal functions as the story's central irony. The moment of greatest commitment became, in retrospect, the moment of greatest exposure, because it forced Mara into a choice she had been successfully avoiding. Her tears on the bridge were likely real. That's what makes them so devastating. She wasn't calculating. She was genuinely torn, and she said yes because in that moment the version of her life with Daniel felt true. The version with Cole also felt true. She had let both run too long without resolution, and when the question became unavoidable, she answered it, and then went home to the other answer the following evening. What the story reveals about trust is this: it is not simply broken by betrayal. It is broken by the realization that your understanding of a person was never complete, that the version of them you loved was real, but not total. Daniel did not love a fiction. He loved a real person who was also, simultaneously, someone he had never fully known. That gap is perhaps the most painful thing to sit with. His decision not to respond to her messages, not out of cruelty but out of clarity, is the emotional maturity of the resolution. He had grieved enough. He understood enough. He did not need her apology to close anything. The door was shut from his side, quietly, and he walked away without making a scene of it. That restraint is its own kind of dignity. What stays with me about this story isn't the betrayal itself, it's the calendar. Those 8 months of scheduled deception, sitting quietly in a shared app, invisible in plain sight. There's something in that detail that goes beyond this specific situation. We all have things we manage carefully, things we keep in separate compartments, things we tell ourselves we'll deal with eventually. The difference is what we're willing to let run while we wait. If there's anything worth taking from Daniel's experience, it's this: the signals were there. They were readable. He simply needed something to be fine more than he needed to know the truth. That's a very human instinct. It's also the one that costs the most in the end. The question worth asking, before any ring, before any bridge, before any yes, is whether you're seeing the person in front of you, or the person you've decided they are. Those are not always the same person.